This is Zimbabwe, a neighbor to the north of South Africa. Once known as the breadbasket of Africa decades ago, the country has been in steep economic decline for many years, due in large part to corruption in the highest levels of government. I was invited to speak there in November of 2017. Before I arrived, God gave me a word of encouragement to the people of Zimbabwe. He said to tell them that their country would once again become the breadbasket of Africa, but that even more importantly, Zimbabwe would become the spiritual breadbasket to the entire continent. I arrived to meet Jean Regis and Giselle Duga, who migrated from the French-speaking island of Mauritius over 30 years ago. 20 years ago, God called them to pastor the church in Chiredzi and oversee many satellite churches in the region. We became good friends in a short space of time, and 2 days after my arrival, the government of Robert Mugabe collapsed as thousands called for his dismissal. A military coup forced his retirement, yet not a single gunshot was ever fired. The church building was built by a Dutch Reformed group who soon abandoned the property when their denomination decided to pull up stakes. The leadership of New Life Church, which is the ministry Regis pastors, was able to acquire the property for pennies on the dollar. The building complex houses a school, several offices, a parsonage, and room for growth. I was privileged to minister at the home church and in Chengele, a region where there is no plumbing or electricity, for several days. God moved powerfully, healing many who were sick and bringing over 50 people to salvation. I was invited back to be their main speaker for their annual conference in August. When I arrived for this second trip, Regis and I were already in discussions about a joint venture called Wells for Zimbabwe. With an unemployment rate of over 80% and the lack of essential services due to poor governance, the citizens of Zimbabwe are impoverished. Many women walk 2 or more miles to fill a bucket with water from the nearest well. As a result, their daughters who help them never go to school or find their way out of poverty. Wells for Zimbabwe is a project designed to help dig drought-proof wells that can serve a community for decades to alleviate suffering. After I arrived on this second trip, we traveled to Mupinga at the urging of Lodi, a deacon at New Life Church. He showed us a system that would change our plans and vision forever. Funded by a Norwegian company, Mupinga has built a unique system that has permanently changed the community. The pump brings water to a holding tank above ground that automatically shuts off when filled. One line can be opened that provides the community with a fresh supply of needed water, just by flicking a switch. Women come with water containers and take as much as needed, often using wheelbarrows to cart the water back to their nearby homes. This in itself is extraordinary. Another line feeds a nearby trough with water. This trough is used for a variety of things, such as water for washing clothes and water for irrigation that I'll mention in a moment. When the women get all the water they need, remaining water in the trough is used to satisfy the animals and cattle bred for food. The entire system is solar-powered, so the ongoing maintenance is negligible. Water is available 24 hours each day for all members of the community of approximately 500 people. As mentioned, some of the water is used to irrigate farmland adjacent to the well. Each family is given one row to manage as a member of the community. They take responsibility to water and care for their row and grow carrots, cabbage, onions, and many different vegetables. Many Zimbabweans lack nutritious food, subsisting on a cornmeal paste known as sadza and goat meat when available. Access to vegetables changes their diets and dramatically improves their health. Due to the weather in Zimbabwe, each family can harvest their gardens 4 times each year. Excess food can be sold to bring in additional income or given away to others at their discretion. When the pastor and I saw this operation, we were incredibly impressed and decided then and there that this was the model we wanted to adopt. The Norwegian NGO, short for non-government organization, is arbitrary as to when and how they finance each project. There are also many political and administrative problems with this arrangement, but we immediately realized that if churches could develop these systems in each community, the benefit would be much more fruitful. The next day we traveled over 200 miles over dirt roads to several different sites, all connected to New Life Church. The first we visited is called Zimbabwe. These women walk 3 miles round trip every day to collect water. Zimbabwe is a community of almost 600 people and the neediest of all the places we would visit. After consulting with the pastor and elders there, we selected a potential open field literally in the middle of nowhere as the best site for a well and irrigation system. This will be where we dig our first well. The pastor brought us together to pray over the site. The next site was in Movavi. As you can see, the church itself is very primitive, with a tarp for a roof and no furniture to sit on. It is a great contrast to America, where people often choose to attend churches based on the quality of the sound system or comfort of the chairs. The believers here are very poor. As I stood leaning against the wall of brick, I realized that if I leaned too hard, the wall would fall inward. This was not a sturdy facility. They have a hand-dug well nearby that everyone uses. After consulting with the pastor, he offered the land necessary to create enough farmland to feed the entire village of several hundred. This will most probably be the site of the second well and irrigation system. Gonwini is our third site. The nearest well is about a half a mile away. The church owns land that is also readily available to create a system for the entire community. In all probability, this would become our third site. Next, we traveled to Chingeli, where I administered during my first trip. Improvements have been made to the church building, and a new skim coat of cement was on the outside. In Chingeli, the church itself has a hand-dug well that is used by the community. Also, the property is adjacent to a school that uses electric power. The pastor and leadership talked about the possibility of working with the electric company to power a new pump, and what it would take to turn this hand-dug well into a machine-dug well to produce more water. As the church also owns the land, they discussed the best site for a farm to feed the community. Finally, we traveled to Chibwedziva. Of all the rural churches, this was the most developed. They had a hand-dug well on the premises, but it was becoming silted, meaning that it was starting to fail. The pastor has been irrigating his garden for food, but the water supply has never been enough to do much more. The men discussed how to convert this silted well into a full irrigation system to serve the community. The pastor offered the land necessary to create the farm when the project begins. When we first investigated digging wells in Zimbabwe, the price tag came in at just about $5,000. When we contacted the builder of the irrigation system in Mupinga, we were surprised to learn that the entire irrigation system, including the tank, solar panels, pump, and necessary equipment, came in at $6,000 out the door. We also learned several ways to do projects in phases so that systems can be partially funded and get started until the full funding arrives. Well, we returned to Chiredzi and spoke with many others about how to bring this vision to fruition. The next night, the conference began. People from each of the previously mentioned regions came traveling many hours. They carried their food, and many slept on church grounds under the stars with their little children. The 220 to 250 people were in a celebratory mood as the conference began. I came to understand that I would be preaching 8 times in over 2.5 days. God was gracious, giving me what I needed for each message. People faithfully attended each session. Over 80 received the baptism with the Holy Spirit, and the worship during each meeting was truly out of this world. Even the children got in on the act. During the second day of the conference, dozens decided to get baptized in water. Yes, that water is genuinely green, and the pool contains several small fish. You had to honestly believe to be baptized that day. But many gladly followed Christ into those waters, many of them teens and young adults. The conference concluded Sunday night with many rejoicing and several giving their lives to Christ. I was privileged to give away 20 New Testaments printed in Shona, the native language of those in attendance. The next day I assumed would be a day of rest, but the pastor had something else in mind. We traveled about an hour to a beautiful home in another region of Zimbabwe. There we were treated to many sights and then left for a safari. Unlike South Africa, safaris in Zimbabwe are not in enclosed vehicles. You sit or stand on the back of a large pickup truck accompanied by armed park rangers. We saw giraffes, zebra, elephant, but the best treat was to come. After the truck parked on a ridge, 2 of the rangers left the truck and walked down into a ravine. 15 minutes later, via walkie-talkie, I learned what they were doing. They found a pride of 12 lions resting nearby. Did any of us want to see them? Oh yeah. 5 of us followed a ranger down the ravine through thick brush to emerge on the other side and come within 100 yards of the pride. When one of the lions stared back at us with its ears perched, the ranger informed us we could come no closer, or the pride would attack. Very exciting. Standing next to an armed ranger caused me to feel very brave. We headed back to our host lodge for a dinner of oxtail, vegetables, and rice, followed by fudge ripple ice cream. A magnificent day indeed. The next day I prepared to leave for home, which would begin at 4 a.m. the next morning. I said my goodbyes to many and finally arrived home after 40 hours of travel. Wells for Zimbabwe, I believe, is a concrete way that Motion Church can make a significant impact on another nation. Not only is this a way to meet a physical need, but under the guidance of each church, it is certain that many villagers will hear the gospel for the first time and find their way to Christ. Please be praying about how you might become involved. Thanks for listening.